Welcome. We have two guests with us today. First is Carlos Cordova. He is the shopper marketing lead at Marketing SI, a Los Angeles-based agency that focuses on retail and digital shopper marketing efforts. Carlos has over 20 years of experience in Hispanic and multicultural marketing and advertising across a variety of different consumer and B2B categories. And we have his tocayo, Carl Kravitz, a U.S.-born and Mexican-bred, multifaceted entrepreneur with over 30 years of experience in the Hispanic market. Thank you for being honest. He is co-chair and CEO of Vida y Salud Media Group, a publisher of Spanish-language health website. He was the board chairman of Los Angeles-based Hispanic advertising agency Cruz Kravitz Ideas, which he founded in 1991. He's also the past chairman of the Association of Hispanic Advertising Agencies, also known as AHA, and a past member of the board of the American Association of Advertising Agencies, the 4As.
And you can stop there.
And I can stop there?
And you can stop there.
That's enough. All right. We're here to talk about sort of a touchy subject. How do the political culture wars in the United States today affect U.S. Hispanic marketing strategies and budgets? And I guess as a way into that conversation, as we were talking earlier, why shouldn't we be talking about politics as marketers? How should we go about that? Because the culture war context today is in a direct assault on the people that we represent, our reason for being from a commercial perspective. So,
something we were discussing earlier is the role that as agency folks, as marketers, the role that we take working with the clients. And we have a lot of clients that live in highly mixed multicultural areas like here in Los Angeles. We also have clients that are based in the Midwest. We try to work with all of them and really represent the population that we serve and the folks that they want to reach, and what would be the best way to reach out to them and communicate. So in one sense, we still play that role of not so much the translators, but representing this population to these advertisers that really want to do the right thing by their product, by the consumer. And we try to play that role in directing traffic, if you will, in how to best to reach out and what to say and what not to say in your communications.
Yeah, so marketing, and I use the word broadly as opposed to just talking about advertising, is made up of a multiplicity of conversations. And the one that we tend to pay the most attention to is the one between the advertiser and the consumer. But there are a lot of conversations that take place in the background before you ever get to that point. And this I think is probably the most important one, is the conversation held between agencies and clients, where they really have to work through the issues that are affecting the people they're ultimately trying to sell to. And as Michael Gallo says, we do have a certain responsibility because we are closer to the ultimate consumer than the client tends to be. We do have a certain responsibility to educate our clients, and it's a funny word, but yes, to help our clients understand the situation in which their ultimate consumer lives, and the situation under which their ultimate consumer has to decide to take action. So we have to talk about it. It may not ultimately end up in the ad, but it certainly informs the ad.
And I think our personal beliefs informs who we are as marketers. It basically sort of makes us be who we are as individuals, and we don't live in a bubble. So obviously, I think what we're fed every day from the media is obviously going to affect our point of view, and I think that will come out in the work output.
And we work with a consumer that, as we know, the research has shown it. Many years working with the media and the advertisers, we have an aspirational population. They are making their mark. They want a better life for their kids, for their children. Now their children are consumers on their own, and we need to deal with that what used to be the Spanish dependent mom, well, now her kids are bilingual and they shop at every retailer out there. But we still have that role in forming that consumer about our brand, the brands that we represent with our clients. And that's really where the story lies. I think we can reflect the values that a lot of the CPG companies would have. You know, we see a lot more diversity on TV now than we ever saw before. That sometimes we say, wow, that company is representing that multiracial family or same-gender parents, for example. And these companies are really speaking with a very true voice to their consumer base. And it's something that we need to absorb and see how do we represent that to that Latino population.
But we know that we're representing, or to use a political term, our constituencies are an aspirational focused market. But that doesn't seem to come through in the news. We may see it in advertising, and that's hence the subject of this. You know, are we the sort of the epicenter of a culture war? What is it that we're not getting across? And this is important because as marketers or as advertisers, I know I'm torn between being a missionary for the people that I represent, for the market that I represent, and being mercenary for the clients that I represent. We're sort of, what path do I take?
We're kind of in between, because on the one hand, we try to drive the conversation in the market. But on the other hand, we're constrained by what the market tells us about themselves, in part by their choices of how they consume media. I mean, if you're going to try to sell to the Latino market, you're not going to advertise on Fox News, because they're not there. So part of what's happening today is I think that audiences in the United States are self-selecting in terms of the media choices they make, and that drives a lot of the message. So sometimes, you know, the very people whose attitudes you'd like to change in some way, and I say that as a human being, not necessarily as a marketer, may not be open to the message virtually by virtue of the choices they're making in terms of media consumption. So it's an interesting thing. We don't really drive the conversation. We drive it, but we are driven.
Arguably, just to devil's advocate, you could reach certain kinds of Latinos on Fox News. You could reach.
There is a segment.
There is probably a pretty large.
30% of the market, more or less, right?
But the problem is, now look at it from a client's point of view. Why would you go to a medium where there's a risk-reward thing too? Why would you choose a medium where you're likely to offend or set off a larger percentage of consumers than you're actually persuading? You wouldn't choose that medium for that particular message. And it's a rational choice.
The other question, I think that the other side of your question is, what is the media not getting right about our market?
Yeah,
because I think
a different issue.
I think we represent a more true version of the Hispanic market. Yes, it may be aspirational, it may be a little too pretty. But on the other hand, what the media is representing us as is also not indicative of where the market is.
Well, you have the media, which is the news media. The news media, which has its own issues and how they approach the market or the consumer or how they choose to cover. But you also have the more traditional entertainment media. And there I see a little bit of a different story, because in the entertainment media, there's a lot more, I like to call it exploration in different programming. They redid One Day at a Time with a Latino cast, and the mom was a vet, and just incredibly interesting. Some programs have great ratings, others don't have as great ratings, but you do see, in some sense, better than the news, on the entertainment side, you do see some experimentation going in. Let's take a great story and use Latino actors or African American actors for that matter.
Or LGBTQ actors.
Or LGBT actors. So there's a lot of movement in that sense. I think the advertisers are seeing that, they're trying to reflect it in their creative. And then by default, I think our our clients then begin to be more advanced into that. You have the multi-generational ad where you have the recognition that it's a millennial youth. Back in the day, it would have been an old
couldn't
school
that be
mom.
what's driving in part the culture wars? Couldn't the fact that
Certainly.
mass media is portraying a culture that people don't necessarily see themselves in?
There's no question. I mean, in the last 15 years, we've seen Ellen DeGeneres go from losing her primetime program because she came out to being the host of the biggest daytime program in the country every year. So there's no question that the entertainment media has, to a great extent, driven the progressive conversation in the country. I don't think it's done quite as good a job with Latinos. I think that there's still some
with any
some pretty
ethnic group, I think
dramatic
with the
issues.
LGBT community, I think they've done a better job,
Yeah.
simply because of the prevalence of LGBT
within their community. Right.
But finding an African American or a Latino in
In a
high
position
places,
of power. Yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah.
So that, and I'm sorry to throw some cold water, one day at a time, and Hispanic was canceled.
Yes, and there was a big groundswell for keeping it. They didn't manage to keep it. They did go away after 1 year. But that also brings up the question of, do you want an ally who's a Latino individual, or do you want a well-placed, enlightened, for lack of a better word, general market executive who takes it on and says, I'm passionate about this market, I'm passionate. I mean, I've had a lot more success with a passionate general market client that believes in the market sometimes than with a Latino client who may not have the traction, you may not have the power, may not have the budget to get projects accomplished.
I think what you said is the crux of the problem. You have one individual supporting it. It is not. It's not a corporate decision. It's not a business decision. It's a personal decision. And when that executive leaves, there goes that program.
That's why diversity in corporations is becoming such a big deal. And there's CFOs, CEOs, CMOs, they're all talking about how do we diversify. The ANA, Association of National Advertisers, has an entire conference, committee, council,
Right.
all focused on diversification with big players.
Within their
CMO of P&G, big players.
But ultimately, unless multicultural, to pick a word, becomes part of the corporate strategy that is driven by the CEO,
right.
and unless it is a metric that the CEO is using to judge all the other C-suite individuals and their reports, it ain't going to happen because it's being pushed down to the level of tactic. Again.
So
Tactics are easy. Tactics move around a lot.
Yeah.
Strategies are big, solid things,
Glaciers.
and they need to come from the top.
So you mentioned the audience. Building on that, you mentioned earlier, audience are sort of self-selecting media today. Their audiences are drawing a much clearer roadmap to how to reach them than they did, even 10 years ago. But corporations are also self-selected, and there are corporations that don't want to touch the Hispanic market with a 10-foot pole. Still, 4 censuses later, market of 64 million, higher buying power than all of the millennials in the United States combined. Still no recognition of the value of this market.
Well, imagine, you have the largest Latino networks. You have Latino, you have Univision, you have Telemundo. They've been knocking on doors. They've probably been knocking on the same doors for decades now in different
Almost
industries.
50 years, yeah.
In different industries that are just not answering it on the other side. These are clients that, for whatever reason, are not activating against the market. The beliefs are that I'm either already getting my fair share. They're not consumers appropriate for my product. If it's some kind of a financial product, automotive products, they may not be my audience. So it's been easy for some advertisers to self-select out. I think, as Carl mentions, it's a top-down approach that needs to be required. I've been in agency side, I've been in the sales side. Data has never convinced anybody. The facts, they come out every 10 years with the census, every 2 years with the economic US census. Data does not make the sale. It's the company that says, you know, I want this consumer, I want to reach out to this consumer, I want them to be part. They may already be shopping in my stores. Now I want to make a concentrated effort to bring them in rather than them shopping at my competitor. Hispanics are now not just shopping in bodegas or in ethnic stores. They're shopping at Walmart and Target just like everybody else is.
Amazon.
At Amazon more and more. So there's, again, the consumer will take us to where we need to get to because the numbers,
if we listen.
If we listen to them, and the smarter marketers, the smarter manufacturers will be the first ones to take advantage of it. I think we're still like lemmings. In certain categories, we need one to break through, and then everybody else will follow. And that takes longer in some categories than others.
And we have to understand that the blockage is not necessarily the same for everyone. I mean, you know, we used the term racial animus before, and yes, there may be some in some companies. I think in the large companies that doesn't tend to be the motivator. I think the motivator more than anything else is fear of screwing up. I think that the person who is tasked with the Latino audience or the African American audience or whatever it is, kind of looks at it and says, you know, I really don't understand it. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want to screw up. I'll get fired. CMOs only last about 18 months anyway.
I can think of at least 3 mid-cap companies.
Mid-caps.
Yeah, large company, Fortune 500, I think.
Yeah,
generally, they're finding a way to get in.
And they tend to be strategically.
But mid-cap companies, I don't know if we should name names, but I can think of at least 3 that are, explicitly not advertising in Spanish for whatever reason.
No, I think names should be named because they're basically coming from a place where, one of them, we know that a natural market for them is the Hispanic market. Yet for purely personal racial issues, the owner says either Hispanics are here, they have to speak English.
Well, that's hopeless.
It is hopeless.
Again, because no data will change that individual.
I would go chase his competitors.
No data will change that person's mind. Only a change, and you said it's an owner-operator, so it makes it a little bit harder. There's no there, obviously. But as Carl mentioned, you go after the competitor.
I completely agree.
But there are going to be companies that have that kind of a hard stop to their approach. And, the goal is to us drive that conversation, the media, which is always knocking on doors directly to drive that conversation. And at the end of the day, the consumer will have to do also its share of the heavy lifting by going to the stores that support their causes, that support their values. As shoppers become more sophisticated, that may happen as well.
Yeah, I think that's less likely because let's face it, our consumer segment is not a wealthy consumer segment, so they can't really afford not to buy in places that may or may not support them. They're probably going to go to places that make sense from an economic standpoint for them.
We've done a lot of work in the retail side, and one of the things that we hear more and more is that, the truism that consumers have more and more choice. It's true, Amazon, but now I can go to Target, I can go to Walmart. I have so many different choices. My neighborhood grocer, and people want that choice. Whereas
both very active players in Spanish.
Very active players, and you can tell by who's being successful, right? By who's opening stores and who's closing stores. But the consumer does respond to that. They're not going to shop at a store that has limited availability of product. They're not going to shop somewhere where they don't feel necessarily welcome. And Hispanics have a very strong word of mouth, and word spreads, and people. Advertisers, a lot of companies know that, I understand that. And I think one of the key things is that whereas back in the olden days, maybe we were shopping at a limited number of stores. Now there's a lot more just cross-shopping. There's more internet being used. Obviously, Hispanics are very high users of internet, but shopping online. So they're speaking with their wallets too.
Yeah.
So how do we? Okay.
Also, by the way, when you're naming people, I'd like to name an entire category, and it's the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Guess what, folks? Latinos get sick too, and in some conditions, they tend to,
Diabetes, for example.
diabetes. The prevalence is much higher. Prevalence of heart disease is much higher, and yet the pharmaceutical companies. And this is an example. Again, I don't think there's animus here. I think this is a place where people are operating a little bit out of fear, and in this particular case, it's fear of the regulators. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to do anything that could possibly put me in the
Crosshairs.
Yes, in the crosshairs of the FDA. But they've got to get, you've got to get past that. The population continues to grow. The population continues to age. It has aged into the high user category, particularly the Spanish-speaking segment of the population, and there should be some movement there. I mean, fear is a big motivator, which more often than not stops things from happening as opposed to making things happen.
Yeah, Patricia and I work in the direct response industry, and there's probably no more segment of the marketing world where analytics drives dollars. And we have seen over the years more and more advertisers make Hispanic part of their testing protocols. So all the large SC non-TV companies are involved. And there are some of our clients, we generate a substantial enough part of the business that this isn't even a question. But just to name names, there's an advertiser who won't touch. There's a couple of direct response advertisers who won't touch the market. Won't even test it. MyPillow and WeatherTech.
Odd, yeah.
Both. Everybody needs a pillow. I don't care who you are. In fact, you could argue Hispanic households need more of them, larger households. And WeatherTech, services is an automotive aftermarket play. Hispanics, just a natural constituency, not only as consumers, but as the people who service. And so
definitely a category where Hispanics index higher.
Yeah.
And then in the hybrid category, USAA, financial services, servicing veterans, of whom Latinos play
A huge
part. So there's certain, even analytically driven.
Well,
We have seen
businesses
some cases where we've seen the opposite, where we would approach somebody who's successful reaching the market, and they will say, I don't want the secret to get out. I'm doing well. I have the market. I really don't want to get the word out to somebody else to come in and steal it from me.
So I'm not going to speak at conferences.
So I'm not going to, I want to fly below the radar. If there's going to be people that do not believe the market is profitable, let them.
But do they
That's
advertise?
perfect. Yes,
Yeah,
these are
that's what
advertisers. These
but-
are advertisers that don't want to get the word out because they're like, I'm doing well. I do not want to share the pie with other ones.
Well,
then
none of
there-
these fall into that category.
No, and
They
then
don't
there's
spend that.
the huge conglomerates that have made the Hispanic Independence disappear. And once they take over, the Hispanic component of the advertising budget drops substantially because Spanish is just, too difficult to do well. So they lower their budgets because I'm reaching in English because my consumers are savvy. So I'm reaching those Hispanic consumers in English. Plus, I'll throw some money to Univision and to Telemundo and that's it. So therefore, the budgets get depleted. It happened to us. There was an RFP for a general market agency. We had a client. We were spending, our budgets were very, very healthy. To the tune of $5 million, $6 million a year. The RFP went into for the general market component. The agency that picked it up said, we will only pick it up if we take the entire business.
Yeah,
And so
we'll throw in the Hispanic for free.
yeah, we were promptly fired, and the Hispanic portion of their budget disappeared entirely.
Sure. Well, there was nobody keep an eye on it. There was nobody nurturing it, so therefore it didn't fit into anybody's bucket, and so it probably went away.
Now, there is, and let me circle back a little bit to the, kind of the topic here about the, the political situation that the country finds itself in now, the great division that there is in the country, everything else. There's light as well as darkness in all of this. I've noticed in the last year or so, for example, that a lot of CEOs are beginning to speak out on the issues, particularly diversity issues. When companies get into a problem, many of them, the CEOs, hop to do something about it really very, very quickly. I mean, we've seen some instances of this, for example, with Starbucks in the last year, with Chipotle, I think was the most recent one, where there was an incident in one of their stores, and they actually shut them down for a day, train everybody, and the CEO gets out there and gets out in front of it. I also see that there's a lot of going on in the area of events, PR, experiential. That is a place where companies seem to be more willing to experiment because it's kind of a closed system. You're talking to a very defined audience, but it's a wonderful place for companies to start looking at how can causes serve their cause, which is sales. So I think that there's a door there, and it may even be a door for some of the more difficult companies to at least do things that are of a modest size, but that are testable and replicable. And it might be the beginning. Advertising for some of these companies may be too big a leap at first, but there are smaller ways to get their toes. To dip their toes in the water.
But I feel like I'm talking
30 years ago.
Yeah. It's really very disheartening.
Before we wrap up, I want to approach this from another angle. How do we think the current political climate is affecting consumers? The consumers that we're trying to sell to. It's not a monolithic customer base, but all of this negativity has to have an impact.
Absolutely.
I would imagine. Right? Do we think it's affecting consumer confidence? Do we think, or is the Latino who has survived a lot worse, the immigrant who has survived a lot worse, just, this is just one more speed bump on my path to whatever I came for?
I think it is an issue, definitely. But I also think that we're not monolithic. And there are going to be those folks that, the kids will be afraid to go to school tomorrow because is mom or dad going to be home when I get back from school because of what they're seeing in the news, or, there's going to be a lot of that. There's also going to be other Hispanics that, are on the other side of that spectrum that are saying, I am in agreement with the directions that we have for, whatever personal reasons. So I think we need to look at the market on that broad sense. I think a lot of the Spanish language media, the consumers of that Spanish language media tend to be the more recent arrivals, consuming programming from back home. That really hasn't changed in terms of the programming content that we see, unless it's sports, unless it's news. So those folks may be more susceptible to that. And I think their news coverage, tries to inform consumers of that. But there's also a big swatch of, Hispanics. We have 55 million Hispanics in the US that are going to be not in that situation. They may sympathize for sure, but there's also a lot of them that, are not going to be in that situation to be personally affected, let's say.
Well, 50 million out of the 55 are here legally.
Well, it's actually 64 million.
Or 64.
So it's 54 million
out
of the 64.
Right. So we do have we do have that range, and I think some will be, certainly affected, but the majority of them won't be. Now, the economics, I think that's a bigger issue, right? Are they in the job areas? Are they in industries where wages are rising? Are they in service sectors where they're stagnating wages? That worries us as marketers because, we want to sell you a new car. We don't want to sell you a used car. We want to sell you one product, not others. We want you to move up the scale, get that home. You need other furnishings. For that, we need wages to increase. We need our industries where we're working to be maybe less service and more something that requires a college degree or a technical degree. And I think that's really where the story is of us getting up on the next ladder on the economic scale.
And let's not minimize the fact that the public discourse affects how we all feel about our circumstances at any given time. And there's no question that the public discourse is cruder, that it's more divisive, and that a lot of people are feeling besieged, under attack, or at the very least, not as easily accepted as they were before. So, you're in shopper marketing. Clearly, their choice is going to be to go to places that make them feel welcome, that say, you matter to us, we understand you, you're part of our family, come shop with us. And go
to
ahead.
that, but it's funny. One of the biggest advertisers in the Spanish language happens to be Walmart, which espouses a lot of these, in their political outreach programs, they espouse Republican values that are against really immigration, that are anti-Hispanic. Yet they're pragmatic enough to, just be all in the Hispanic market, and Hispanics applaud and vote with their wallets, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that dichotomy. There's right there.
Well, consumers will look for, where the value is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where the convenience is going to be at, not perhaps not driven by, what at a higher corporate level the messaging may be. But, definitely responding to somebody that when you're in the store has that.
Yeah, no, I wasn't referring to the consumer, because the consumer
Well,
is
and they
right to
have,
go. I was talking about the corporate side.
And they have,
the
and they
corporate
have,
side and the family.
and they have the right to believe and support anybody that they want,
Yeah,
but they are contributing to our market by providing products and services that the market can afford. By they're talking to the market respectfully. They're, so
Absolutely.
I'd rather have that any day. I don't care what
No,
side of the scale
absolutely.
you fall.
But
right?
then on the other hand, they demonize it in many ways.
But it's the companies that don't, whether they're demonizing or not, the companies that either out of fear or prejudice or whatever, that don't get involved from a marketing
Mm-hmm.
perspective, that are doing themselves a disservice.
They're doing themselves
They're
a
letting their
disservice.
ideologies get in the way.
The truth is that they're not hurting the community. They're hurting
They're hurting
their own
themselves.
pocketbooks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to end. I think we're out of time. Thank you. And any of our viewers, listeners that want to get in touch with us, challenge us, scream at us, do it via email at the addresses that we'll put up at the end of the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Salud.
Salud.
Oh, we should have done
Yeah.
that.
Coffee?
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.